Hi, everybody. Thank you for coming to this windowless room to hear about streaming fraud, which is, a problem that a lot of people debate the extent of, but it's a very real problem. We're going to be hearing a lot about the extent of it and about what's being done to stop it. And we will also hear more about an exciting venture that could stop a lot more of it. So I'm going to first introduce my panelists. I'm Robert Levine. I'm the Deputy Editorial Director of Billboard. Billboard has done some reporting on this. I would encourage you to read it. One of our reporters, Elias, has done a good job. And introducing everyone, starting from over there, we have Darlene Hall, Head of Distribution at Create Music Group / Label Engine. We have Andrea Gleeson, CEO of Tunecore. Christine Barnum, Chief Revenue Officer of CD Baby. They don't sell CDs anymore, but it's still called CD Baby. And but that's kind of cool. And we don't write about billboards anymore. And Andrew Batey at Beatdapp, which is the leading fraud detection solution for the music business. And probably a man who knows, I think I've learned more about streaming fraud from him just preparing for this panel. It's quite something. So let's start. Andrew, why don't you start? How big is this problem? Give us a sense of what it looks like on the distributor end, and then I'll come to you.
Yeah, so we are the, like you said, the leading fraud detection service globally. We sit on the streaming services themselves and take tons of first-party data. So we have like battery life, gyroscope, which distributors it came from, labels, all the in-app activity they did before they streamed. So we're able to analyze massive amounts of data. And internally, we actually have something called a distributor risk score. So we can actually see all the data from those distributors, even though they didn't give us it directly, and we can categorize them and know which ones are the highest risk for fraud. And that's actually one of hundreds of flags that we have to identify fraud. So in terms of the amount of fraud we see some distributors that have north of 50 to 60% of all of their streams being fraudulent in high volume. I'd say we see a huge grouping that's 20 to 40%. And then there's some that are kind of clean, doing all the right things that they can proactively.
Characterize what you mean by a distributor, because you have a specific meaning that is not always the traditional music definition has changed.
I mean people like a company whose sole purpose or main purpose is to put music onto the streaming services themselves, often in a DIY format. So people can use any of these hundreds of distributors to release their music on these streaming platforms. And what we see overall then is sort of a minimum of 10% fraud across the industry. So if you're like last year, for example, on some of the DSPs we were on, we shifted market share by double-digit percentages back to rights owners. So you're talking about a massive amount of money, billions of dollars that's being sort of siphoned off the industry. And how it's happening is they're not trying to be breakout artists. They're sitting there in the mid to long tail. We've found hundreds of thousands of accounts that are playing songs one time. And so they're in concert, staying at a really low level, trying not to be detected intentionally, and slowly sucking pennies from everybody. And they're using massive amounts of distributors. They're using lots of fake labels. They're using content that's not necessarily real. And all that does is affect all of the real artists and the real music companies that are trying to actually be a part of this industry.
We left these seats in the front row. Oh, I was going to make a joke. I'll stop. I was going to say we left those open if any of them wanted to show up, but I was just laughing about the empty row. I didn't mean to give you a hard time. Andrea, how does that look on your end? Because you're trying to run a service. You're trying to run a company that's providing a service, and that service is being misused, but it's hurting your other clients in the ecosystem at large.
Yeah, I mean, for us, we want our artists to all be paid for their hard work. And so that's our mission, and we want to make sure that we are being as proactive as possible to catch users that are coming to our platform and misusing it. But it's really tricky because we have Christine, who also is a CD Baby, like we started working on talking about some of these issues because we run into the same thing. We put a lot of investment to try to catch those bad actors as proactively as possible. Often we're not catching them until after it already occurred, and it becomes an issue for us, but our intention is to make sure that our artists are paid their share, because that dilutes the market. We should talk about the kinds of bad actors there are, because there's like overt bad actors that come in and put up like legitimate music, and then they are artificially streaming it, which is what you're referring to. But then there's also artists that come in and they don't understand that they're coming in to pay for a marketing service with somebody that is going to do PR for them, and that company is then buying streams. And so I think that it's really important as we think about solutions that we talk about the different kinds of users that there are that are engaging in this. Some artists don't even know they're engaging in stream fraud because they just thought they paid for marketing, and then there's like also overt bad actors.
And so when you,
Yeah.
so far you're talking about the artist that doesn't know, but these are actual, somewhat, both of these cases, there's a person, a human person making music. It's not just like totally fake. There's a real thing at some, okay.
Yeah. And I think for us, ultimately it becomes very hard to detect, right? Because it's real music coming onto our platforms, but then the actual fraud is not happening on our platforms, it's happening on our DSP partners' platforms. And so until that fraud occurs, we can't catch it. So we have done steps to try to catch it more proactively. Like we have something that we implemented called SIFT that essentially looks at the footprint of that user all across the internet, both on their IP addresses and the credit cards they use, to say, hey, has this user done bad behavior somewhere else across the internet that then they can be given a low score, and then we decide not to put that content up. But it's a real gap because often we're catching it after it already occurred because we're open. Yeah.
One of the big problems too is that there's this thing of account takeovers. So even if you're looking at, individuals who have been accused of fraud or like obviously identifiable, the majority of the endemic fraud that's happening is, to your point, not artists, but professional scammers. That's like 80% of what we see. And it's super easy for me to just go buy accounts. Like there are professional fraud services who only hijack your computer. There's another microservice that just uses the technology to then move those accounts in concert. There's another service that's the marketplace with full reviews for you to buy that. I can go and buy 400,000 accounts tomorrow for any streaming service by just going to one of these things and buying it just as easy as I buy cloud server space on Amazon. It is not hard.
I'm starting to imagine that right now, probably in like Cyprus or Malta, they're having a conference like this one. And it's like how to stop, and the panel is like how to stop you.
Yeah,
That means you're doing something right. Don't take it the wrong way. But it's basically you're up against a shadow ecosystem.
yeah, and the reality is
The
that
upside down.
the incentives for indie industry to catch themselves almost always it is not the right way typically, because everyone makes money from the streams to occur. What you need in almost every industry, finance, e-commerce, whatever, is some centralized Switzerland that does not actually have an incentive which way or the other. That's why we've never taken money from any strategic. We have no music industry people on our cap table. We are a true Switzerland that works to eradicate fraud. And in terms of numbers, by the end of this year, we're going to have 50 people just dedicated on this one product because it is whack-a-mole. They're constantly evolving. You're talking about, millions and millions of dollars of headcount constantly trying to stay ahead of this thing. It makes no sense for all of these disparate services to try and build themselves because no one's trying to be the best at policing the interwebs or the streaming services. You guys want to be the best at distributing content. You want to be the best at having the best user experience for your users to engage with that content. And in every industry, this presents itself eventually, and it's sort of a badge of honor for music. Like we finally made it. We're big enough that scammers want to scam us, and now there needs to be a service that exists to kind of eradicate that.
When you talk about catching it in time, one of the things I think about is obviously, in time means before the check goes out. Mm-hmm. So there's this constant thing of, especially in the indie sector, how fast can you pay me? I often tend to think, how accurately can you pay me may be more important, but obviously that might be considered insensitive in certain contexts. Like, how do you change how fast you pay based on patterns of behavior, or you can't?
I mean, I can speak to this from the CD Baby perspective. We've got 25-year legacy of paying our artists every single week, which in the music industry, getting paid regularly is not a given, but our artists know, like, okay, on this date, we always get Spotify money. On this date, it's always Apple Music. And so you have a user base that is at scale. with certain expectations. Like, you can't really delay that. You know, even if a payment comes in late from a provider, we will fight tooth and nail to get it posted and paid out in time. And so we don't have the luxury of, you know, delaying payments or waiting for a better time. It is jump in, you know, whatever time of day or night, reviewing the content, auditing it, doing all of our own checks and balances.
And if you find, any of you can step in on this, if you find that someone, so if you have a reasonably good idea that something is fraudulent, I say reasonably good idea, not like, you know, there's no internal court as far as I know, but, you know, you have a pretty good idea that, like, you know, they're the biggest reggaeton band in Moldova and they don't have a Facebook page or an internet site. I'm making that up. Maybe there is such a band. You think they're fraudulent. Can you try to claw back the money you gave them, or it's just sort of pointless because they're gone and doing something else?
Ideally, in those cases, we would withhold the payment. You know, we would pay everyone else, but keep their funds back. And usually, if they're a legitimate artist, they'll write and be like, "Hey, we have a question or a concern." If it's that band in Moldova with no Facebook page, we might not ever hear from them because they were like, "Oh, we got found out."
Yeah, we freeze accounts while we do investigations, and then if we know, like, we have good reason to think that this is fraudulent, we will freeze the accounts forever. And yeah, we remove all the content from all DSPs. So if we know that it happened, you know, fraud happened on Spotify, we'll remove it from everywhere.
One of the dangers of implementation is that as soon as you do something, they realize they've been caught and they adjust their methods. So one of the big things we work on with DSPs actually is shadow banning them and flagging them, but not communicating with anybody that that's been occurred. And the reason that you do that is so that there's no signal to those fraudsters that they've been caught. So you can watch them and catch all the other fraud they do over time. You'll literally see them slide one fake song out and put a new song in. You'll see them turn off one platform and turn on another platform and then switch to a third platform. You'll see them try and scam a smaller platform and then scale that scam up across all the larger ones. And so what you want to do is be able to detect them early across platforms and then start watching for them everywhere else. And to that end, to your confidence level, Beatdapp never, ever calls something fraud unless we're 99.9% certain. We have to be so certain that it's fraud, and the reason is we actually indemnify the services. So if we are wrong and the rights owners was correct, we actually then pay for that the mistake. So we pay up to $2 million for that infraction. So
But that's calling them fraud or freezing an account?
We call them fraud, but I'm saying we won't even say it's fraud, even if it looks wildly suspicious, unless we are absolutely certain. And that's part of how, in the implementation, we deal with that. But then when we go to the DSPs, for example, or even some of our distribution partners, we say, hey, don't take an immediate action right. Obviously, don't pay them, but don't take an action right away, because the longer you can hold off from showing them what you're doing, the better chances you have of them not figuring out how to circumvent you again. And unfortunately, a lot of distributors obviously aren't going to get that information right away, but that's just part of combating this problem.
There's also a danger at scale that at some point you're going to freeze an account that belongs to I don't see this as I don't see it as unforgivable, irreversible, or truly terrible. I see it as just a realistic effect of policing this at scale. At some point, you're going to cut off someone who's a legitimate artist, and you're going to have, they need to be able to contact you and say, hey, it turns out there's a huge audience for heavy metal in, I don't know.
Yeah. I had a friend that made a noise album.
Okay.
It was just a noise album, and he sold out all of the actual vinyl, like a huge following, and it's just a bunch of noises. It's an experimental, music collection. Really legitimate artist, sound engineer, but when I heard it, I was like, what is this? This is the worst thing ever. That's a great example of needing to disprove what looks like an anomaly. Because you can't penalize artists that are doing something unique or creative. You can't penalize fans who are just a strong brand advocate for that artist. And if you're an indie, you are always looking for a new way to break out, or a new way to be creative, or a new way to engage. And so sometimes that new way can look like an anomaly, and it's really important that we get it right and don't call that fraud if it's not.
So hold on, now I have to ask a question that's slightly to the side of this. I apologize, but when you're 99.9% sure that something is fraud, what does it sound like? Is it random noises? I mean, I assume it's not silence because that would trigger something else.
Yeah, there's two real types of fraud. There's the sort of financially motivated fraud, and that can
Right.
actually sound like just any music. Like it's real music. You can buy songs from struggling artists for inexpensively. You can make songs that aren't great but sound mediocre and good enough. Like there's lots of ways to acquire music and then run bots against it slowly. Then you have the other kind, which is perception based, where it's someone just trying to break out. Often, to your point, they might have hired someone and not realized that they were actually hiring, because it all says real users, real songs. Like they don't realize that they've made a mistake.
Right.
But when you come to them and say, like with our case, here's the 47 flags of exactly what we found, because we're not black box. When we go to the streaming services to give that information back, we don't say, hey, this is the percentage we find. We actually say this is exactly why. And here's you went from 99% iOS to 99% Windows in 1 week on your release. All of these 180 accounts only played your song one time and never played another artist, or 180,000, let's say. Like that then it's hard to dispute like the facts when they occur, but often those facts go unfiltered or unchecked. So we just try to provide them the evidence so that when they're the artist, they can say, oh, I hired the wrong company. And if they did that, we don't want to penalize artists. We don't want you to be blackballed as an artist. We just want you to hopefully make better informed decisions on how to market your music later.
But there's another kind of artist too. There's also the ones that know what they're doing and they're juicing their numbers. Yeah. And that does happen. And it's unfortunately kind of an open thing on the market that's been accepted even with big artists, that they'll go and they'll buy streams and like juice their numbers. And then artists feel like they're at a disadvantage, the ones that are in the indie sector, and they feel like they need to do that too to keep up. So let's just be honest, that also happens. And I think that this is where it gets very tricky, and it's a balancing act, because you need the consequences to be severe enough to deter this behavior, but also have an appeal process for the ones that didn't realize what they were buying. And I think that's the balancing act. And I think there's like an appeals process. Like, essentially if somebody's music gets taken down from Spotify, we work with the DSPs to kind of go case by case and like rectify that.
I'm imagining it's like night court. Kind of
night court.
Night court. But can you what's the when legitimate artists do this? I've heard this broken down two ways. Well, first tell me if I'm right, I guess. One is I want to act like I'm more popular than I am to get an advance on a label deal. The other thing is, I have a record coming out and I'm more nervous that it's not going to perform, or hey, everyone's doing it, I'm going to give myself another 5%.
Right. Yeah.
In the second case, who's doing that? Because presumably when you get to the major level, they're publicly held companies.
The majors aren't doing it.
That's not true.
The percentage of fraud on majors is so minuscule compared to the entire market. It is truly not maybe in the past, but as of today, the majors are truly not perpetuating this fraud. Like it is a small percentage of the overall market. We can see where the fraud's coming from. We can tie it back to labels. We can tie it back to distributors. It is not coming from the major camps at this point. I don't know what happened years ago, but as of today, they have taken a hard stance and a zero tolerance on it, and they are serious about eradicating that from their catalog.
But it's still happening.
It'll always happen, but I'm saying it happens such a small percentage.
Let's actually move past this, because I think I'm going to say that if you are a major and you're publicly held, I think the risk is very high. Once you're a public company, it's not you look bad, it's someone goes to jail. So I would assume that it's not sanctioned. Whether someone who works there is doing it is another issue, but let's put that aside for a minute. You hear a lot about fraud in certain markets. Like a lot of the coverage I see involves Germany, France, Brazil. Is there something in those markets that make them targets? Are journalists looking for it more there? What's the origin of, or is it just a local media obsession in certain places? And Darlene, you haven't said a lot. I want to get you in there.
I mean, the only thing I can touch on this is like we see a lot of fraud coming out of places like India, and my only thought is like you can buy things for way less money than if you paid someone to do it in the States. And so people are outsourcing in those territories, but they can also make it seem like it's not coming from that territory as well. So it's kind of hard to pinpoint exactly what territories it's like going off in, but that's what we've seen.
Let's separate out where it's taking place for a minute, but you hear a lot about German rappers or French artists, like, let's talk about the market in which it's taking place, not sort of the source of the tools. Is there something about those markets that make them susceptible?
I think that it can happen in any market. I just think maybe the coverage isn't happening because we deal a lot with US clients and we are dealing with this on a daily basis as a distributor. And we do have a lot of UK and Europe clients as well who we see it in. So I don't think it's really just one territory. It just might not be covered as fully everywhere else.
Interesting.
With VPNs too, it's really hard to tell where people are coming from, and the sophistication of these fraud networks is quite extreme. So you can quite literally say, I want them all to look like their iOS devices from the US. I want them all to look like they came from Europe. And it's becoming very difficult to distinguish which market they're actually from. And I think like that is the sort of misnomer here, that they're coming from Brazil or India or France. We see just as much fraud in France and the US as we see in other countries. So it's not like it's just happening in these emerging markets. It is happening globally, and everyone's participating.
Let me ask this, how much of it, how much of it alarms people on the other side? You're talking about you're all talking from a revenue share perspective, which is obviously, I think, the most important business issue. There's another business issue, which is, I have a label, I want to sign some artists. I'm looking for people, in the old days, you looked for promising, talented people. And now you're like, that's old fashioned, let's look at the metrics. So you're looking for what kind of streams they have. And the idea, that information is sometimes not actually correct.
Actually, you have a good example about that one.
Do I?
Yeah, with the label you signed.
Oh, I don't know what you're talking about. But I can touch and say that like when you are looking at statistics like on Spotify for artists, it can be easy to detect weird stuff. Like you can see the amount of people who stream the song within a certain timeline, and you could be like, that's kind of weird that they're all coming from this one place, but this artist isn't really known in this territory. So you can kind of like see what's kind of fake and what's not, and also like third-party playlisting. Are they on like all of their streams are coming from third-party playlisting and not directly from their catalog? Then that's probably not someone that you're going to want to sign because it's not organic.
And yesterday there was someone on a panel that I watched that said that they shifted their entire marketing plan because one of their artists was starting to get big in Brazil, right? And so like all of a sudden all these streams are going in Brazil, and they're looking at all the user analytics and going, Brazil's hot for this artist. So now they're doing an influencer campaign just with Brazilians. They have like a whole tour date thing signed up for Brazil. And so imagine like you are looking at this and going, oh, my artist is hot in Indonesia. We better get that Southeast Asia tour going. And like really, that could totally be manipulated, and the label doesn't actually realize that, and they're making entire marketing decisions based on sort of the false premise that these fans exist in those markets.
So it's almost as though you really have to know what's going on.
For sure.
Scary. Let's talk a bit about countermeasures and what you're doing and sort of leading up to some more steps. What kind of, like, how much of a distraction sounds like the wrong word. This is a significant complication of running a business. You didn't get, you got into the fraud detection business. Seems like you're doing great. The rest of you are not in the fraud detection business. You're in the distribution artist services business. Yeah. How distracting is this from the main work of running your business?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely I can speak for myself. It was a distraction from my day job from back when I was doing accounting and royalty work. It got to the point where it's like, okay, this is a full-time job, and you have to build out a team, you have to invest, you have to, Andrea was saying they pay for SIFT, we pay for account, we do all the right things. But the tricky part is that, from the distributor vantage point, every transaction that comes through, we only let through because it looks good. It meets our risk thresholds. We don't know the intention of that user.
Sure.
And we don't see any negative consequences until they're out on the Spotify's, Pandora's, whatever DSP you choose. They're the ones with that visibility. And so it's a really distraction. And then there's the education component, because you have to teach your artists, like, okay, this marketing plan that seems like a great deal and guaranteed streams, it's like, no, if it seems too good to be true, it's not going to be true. And so there's that constant continual education component where you have to deal with the customer contacts and be like, why did I get taken down from Spotify? And, you have to do an appeals process. So Definitely a
They try to
distraction.
fight you and say they
Exactly.
didn't do it.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, there's all
Lots
the
of back
stages
and
of
forth.
grief.
And the most negative comments about your company all over Twitter are always these fraud actors.
Yeah.
They're
Is
like,
that true?
oh, yeah.
No, our Twitter, if we get,
Oh, yeah.
we flag something, we take it down, we're like, this is the proof, this happened. They will go on our Twitter and they'll be like, this company's not paying me, don't work with them. And it's literally just the
Yes.
people who are fraudulent that are doing that.
The
So
most
it's,
negative comments about Billboard are all from K-pop fans, because they were like number 2 or 3, and they send us like the charts team death threats.
oh, yeah, people
Just
get
if you're
crazy on the internet.
But they're always death threats written in like purple crayons. Like if you get a death threat in purple crayon, like do you want to take? On the one hand, like okay, it's like you can't take it as a joke. On the other hand, there's like how many professional killers are really using unicorn stationery at this point? It's very.
Yeah.
But it is distracting, right? Like that's why
Totally.
last year we went to distributors and offered them all the fraud detection services for free. We're like, we'll take on the fraud for you. We'll help you guys fight the fraud. We have a number of distributor clients where they don't get the same level of data as the streaming service does, but we kind of have we're grading our own homework because we know what the number is already. Because we're sitting on the streaming services, we know that this DSP or this distributor is 40%, and maybe with their data we catch 20. So we know we need to go another 20% before we're at the level. And so while we can't take data from one and share with the other, we can use their data to help them find it. And so last year we started working with a bunch of distributors to help them combat fraud, and we just said, look, we'll provide this for free to you because we know it's really hard and distracting for you as a business unit, and that's exactly what we're best at doing.
And who's paying for it?
We paid for it.
Right, but where are you making money then?
We generally charge the streaming services,
Okay.
but realizing that it's going to take years before it comes down into the next levels, we decided to be proactive last year and start offering it for free to distributors so that we could help them fight the fraud from the other end before it becomes a much larger problem down the road. And because
Okay.
they don't want, like, if you're a distributor and you're, realistically, do you want to hire 40 or 50 people to solve this problem? Like, that's a lot of time, and they're always changing their paths. So it's a never-ending process. You are signing up to be the FBI of streaming. We're already the FBI. We might as well just offer it for free to these other distributors.
So it's almost like you need some kind of centralized.
That's the way it's played out in every industry. There needs to be a Switzerland who has no incentive to make money off of streaming fraud. And that means that typically incumbents or industry leaders in those spaces can't then participate in policing themselves because there's always an incentive in one of the parties to sort of abuse that system at some level. And so often you need to, like in telco, you see them basically leasing credibility by working with sort of associations or whatever so that they can appear to be sort of like the Switzerland. But in reality, they still have an incentive to winning. So you actually need a true Switzerland. In finance, it's Verifin. Google has a product they do for AdWords and all the ad tech and sort of all the e-commerce stuff. In almost every industry, you need a true Switzerland that isn't aligned with
But this
strategics.
is interesting. It's because there's not a the hard part about this particular kind of fraud is there's no direct benefit from the services because you're still getting $10 a month, right? You're not getting more or less.
Many distributors make a percentage of the money. That
No, I mean the services. Sorry, you're not like getting. You're like.
Oh,
if
this
you
DSPs, you mean?
Right, but
Yeah.
the good part is, if you're not losing money by cutting out fraud, either, right? With online advertising, there's always this thing of we're trying as hard as we can.
Well, you have advertising fraud too, right? Like if people are running the
course.
streams and then you're charging people for ads, that's also ad fraud. So in the streaming service side, that actually kind of impacts the free tiers. Also, you want to be a good partner. So like on the DSPs that we were on last year, like I said, we moved, market share back to rights owners, which included independents, by the way. It's not like it was just like majors. It was everyone across the board. You're talking about close to 20%. So that's a huge amount of money that's going back to all these individualized artists. And so like, the reality is that you just have to continue fighting the problem. And
But let me go to Andrea. Why don't you tell me what's next? Because I know you have an announcement to make,
Yeah.
and I can see you looking forward to sharing it. This is actually not her. It's everyone's announcement. Why don't you sort of start and
Yeah.
get into it a bit?
So we're really excited to share today. Here's breaking news that we are launching the Music Fights Fraud Alliance that incorporates distributors, labels, and streaming platforms. And essentially we have quite a few members. So Christine and I started talking a little bit about this problem that we both are fighting the same issues and essentially are working with an organization. And I'm going to pass it to Christine because she's sort of the brainchild behind making this come to be. And then we'll talk a little bit more about next steps for it.
Yeah, so super excited for this. Music Fight Frauds, it's an alliance of various industry partners, distributors, open platforms, Tunecore, who else do we have?
DistroKid, United Masters,
Symphonic.
Empire, Downtown.
Yeah, Downtown.
So the entire Downtown
Yeah.
group. Believe, our entire group.
Eventually Label Engine in there too.
Yeah.
And also Spotify and Amazon.
Yeah.
So we're really on Symphonic and Video.
Yeah, and NVIDIA, yeah. And
Yes.
so that's like our launch group. And the whole idea is that, our perspective of the transaction, everything looks good. It goes out to the distribution points, and that's where the fraud occurs. And the content just leapfrogs from, my platform to Andrea's platform to the next platform. And there's always, there's money to be made in that time period. And so that we can't eliminate it ourselves. And so this gives us an opportunity to work together as competitors in a collaborative way, because, if we're just doing this all in silos, it's never going to go away. So we're able to share information in a way that is secure, that doesn't violate, antitrust things, it doesn't violate GDPR, various PII concerns around privacy. And using a third-party organization, their nonprofit, the NCFTA,
Which is right there.
Right there, yes. Hi,
If you have
Jay.
questions about them, they're right here.
And they will be that true Switzerland neutral third party. They're a nonprofit organization. They do this for a variety of industries. And it's like, if other more sensitive industries are able to get over this hurdle, I feel like the music industry is
Yeah,
going to...
banks and the credit card industry use them, and I think for us, like we said, there's different fraud actors that we hope to be able to address one at a time. The first area that the Fraud Alliance is going to tackle is the fraud hoppers. Those overt bad actors that
Hold on, the fraud hoppers.
fraud
Fraud
hoppers.
Sounds like a great name
Fraud
for it.
hoppers.
Sorry, I'm trying
That's what
to
we've
keep, this
been
is
referring
very
to them
important.
as.
This is very important, and I'm just trying to keep it light. What a great name for a band. Come on. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so they'll start off on CD Baby, let's say. Christine will catch them. They'll come over to TuneCore. We'll catch them, and then maybe they'll go over, to a label and be like, hey, I have these great numbers. They don't know that all that had just happened, and they'll sign them and give them an advance. And so we want to create a way to do what SIFT does, but SIFT is just so specific to any bad behavior across the internet, but be able to do that more proactively. It's really important that this is really trying to address a more proactive way to catch overt bad actors. And we're also going to catch some of those artists that either went and tried to juice their numbers, or they didn't know and they hired a marketing firm. And I think the important thing is that this alliance will come together and come up with those, what is egregious that will go on, what is the appeals process, to start, and then we'll tackle other parts of fraud to hopefully really, really reduce it to the point that we don't keep talking about this and having panels.
Yeah, and
Wait, you can't, hold on, no panels? Wait,
it
well,
can be panels about other things.
But
Other
let
things.
me
Other
ask you
things.
one more question, because to the extent that these fraudsters are musicians, that's one issue, but the other scenario is that they're professional.
Yes.
They're in the fraud business and they think of it as a business. So part of the idea is they're going to get pushed over to writing me emails about how the Prince of Nigeria has a lot of money for me, or some other kind of thing, right? Like the idea is to impose a cost to this.
Yeah.
You told me some stuff that how lucrative can this be now?
Well,
Because numbers spun my head.
$2 billion a year that's probably being sucked out the back door from rights owners that would have been paid for streaming. So you're talking about billions of dollars, not hundreds of millions of dollars. Also, they're constantly changing their ways. So, this year we're going to do 80 trillion events analyzed. So we're talking, hundreds and hundreds of billions of plays from streaming services, or I guess trillion or whatever. But we are finding the craziest amounts of fraud in the most unique ways. For an example, we saw one where they were releasing songs as another artist with just a different payee. But because we tracked usage, we could see where they were directing to. And then when we found that they had been sucking money from that specific artist, we then went and built models to go find it, and they'd done it to 1,700 other artists the same way. And these are like mainstream, huge artists who have no idea that they're being stolen from. So that's just one type of fraud. It's never just stream juicing one way or content ID fraud or like whatever. This is like whack-a-mole. And so to this endeavor, I'm grateful, because honestly, we should all be fighting this as much as we can, and that this is going to take a collective effort no matter what. And so even though I think we are the leader in this space, there is so many ways to combat fraud, and everyone should really be chipping in, doing their part.
Where are the majors on this? Labels, I mean.
I've said how I think. I think the majors have a zero tolerance policy.
No, but sorry, not in fraud in general, but in this venture, like they're not signed up for it.
Not
Are
yet,
they
but-
cautiously approving?
Not yet. We just haven't made our way to talk to everybody, so we're doing this at first, this announcement.
Okay.
This is for everyone. This is not for the indies. Really excited. We've been talking to Mitch Glazer from the RIAA. We want to encourage more people to participate. Portia from Music Biz, also a huge supporter, and we want to make this an industry-wide alliance across all sectors, because that's how we're going to do it. I can't solve this, to your point, I can't solve this by myself, looking at the data I have. Christine can't do that. And this is why we want to create, and it's so important with the NCFTA because they are a nonprofit. I think that really important also piece about it is they have law enforcement sitting in their offices. The FBI and the Homeland Security is sitting headquartered in their offices. They work with other law enforcement agencies from across the world, and they are a nonprofit, so they are doing this really for the sake of fighting fraud across all sectors, many sectors, not just music. Music will be a new vertical, and that way there's consequences. And then, it's almost like we've got to start somewhere. It's the same thinking of like you have an alarm system on your house with like a label, and it like will deter a little bit. And then as you start catching them and seeing that they can't do this, it will push them hopefully out of our industry, have them go look somewhere else.
The ultimate goal is to have a label, and then they break into someone else's house instead, which is very depressing. But you can't. There's no perfect security, right? Every year, there's 3 new businesses starting online. NFTs were a locus for fraud for a long time. Stock fraud, money transfer fraud. Now AI is the new, every single thing is AI. We have a rule at Billboard where, I don't know if we've been perfect about it, you're not supposed to call something AI unless it is actually AI. Yeah. You can't just call anything, it's things heat up. I think, anyone want to have the last word, and then we'll have time for a couple questions? Darlene,
I'll just say, like, there's ways as an artist and as a label that you can try to detect these things and stop it on your side too. And like the biggest thing is third-party playlisting. I was just in the Spotify panel before this, and they straight up were like, it's against our guidelines for you to tap into any service that guarantees you like a placement or stream, and they frown upon it. So when you're also like pitching for priorities and they're seeing that this is happening, it's going to deter them from wanting to support you as an artist or in a label. So there are small steps that we can take in our everyday to try to stop this as well.
Yeah.
Let's open it up for some questions. I want to emphasize, we're going to go for questions, not filibusters. If you've been a filibuster in the past, you know who you are. We just want questions. I'll start with this gentleman here. You can either wait for the micro. Oh, sorry. You're first. He's second. Introduce yourself. And if you don't, actually, I'm going to start with you in front, and then we'll go to you.
Okay, hi.
Okay, go ahead.
Sorry to give you my back. Jay Kramer at the organization that Andrea mentioned, NCFTA. And yes, we're a nonprofit, public-private partnership for cyber threat intelligence sharing. It's a lot of words, but in short, hundreds of organizations across critical sectors, healthcare, the large financial services, largest banks in the world. And I think, Christine, you said it. Yes, we're competitors out there, out in the wild. But in our space, it's about collaboration and sharing intelligence to impose a cost. So many things that were said, I was jumping out of my skin to respond, but we're so excited about lending our 50-plus analysts to this effort to try to impose a cost, make it more difficult, and to understand the threat landscape in training and education too much to talk about here. I'm not going to be the filibuster, so I'll sit down. But it's nice to meet you all. Keep up the good work, everybody, really.
Yeah, thank you.
Hey, what's going on? My name is Nice on the Sonics. I'm an audio engineer in New York City. I work at Platinum Sound Studios in Midtown under Jerry Wonder. Real question. I have like a very strong independent artist base. And when pulling their strategies together, like because they don't really have enough information, they have been like paying for people to help market them, and it could be just a friend of theirs or somebody that they know who knows how to get on a particular playlist or whatever. So they do this, and it messes up their data, and they may have an issue. Sometimes they don't like have like a dramatic getting caught type experience, but I know that these DSPs, they do recognize certain suspicious behavior, and they recommend you differently based off of that. My real question is, say for instance, you do realize or find out that you have been getting some services that were fraudulent services. How do you reverse like the bad data that you get from that experience and get back on track as an artist? Because I have seen situations where hiring the wrong marketer or the wrong situation can destroy your account and make it very hard for you to promote your music from there on out. And, you know, it's just because people are just really desperate to find answers on how to push their music on these streaming services sites.
That's a great question.
You must repent.
Yeah, I think the short answer right now is you don't. Like, one of the big problems is if they catch you, they don't want to explicitly tell you how they caught you. And so that's like an issue because you don't want to just like flag to people who are fraudulent, even if they didn't mean to, like how to adjust. So I think that's a struggle. Plus, there's a liability in sharing that down. So
Sorry, I
think
just want to say, like,
issues there.
the lack of transparency about the consequences is very frustrating for independent artists, and I think it's heartless not to be sympathetic with that. I am sympathetic with that. However, if you tell people specifically what they did that got them caught, you're then providing a roadmap. If you tell people what unsuccessful fraud is, you're giving other actors a roadmap to successful fraud.
Right.
So I want to say that, like, while I understand the frustration, this is not in my opinion, I'm coming from the outside, I'm not an expert, this is not unreasonable, it's just sort of a huge, it's not really a winning situation.
Yeah, just for some clarity, it's really about a situation. I'm just speaking because I know a whole bunch of scenarios, right? A specific situation where it's just like, yo, I think that my data is messed up. How can I get my data back on track? If there's somebody that I can contact and say, hey, I think that, you know, whatever's been going on for the last month or whatever this campaign has been going on, like trying to find ways to reverse this situation and get back on track. Is there a method for an artist who feels like they have been frauded or in a bad situation to get back on track and reverse some damage that have been done?
I would reach out to your distributor and explain it, and then we do an appeal process with the appropriate DSPs depending on where it occurred, and see what can be done. It's very case by case.
Same.
Typically, it's just to be really real, the reversal doesn't happen with many.
No.
It's so be very careful. Like, I would just really question the marketing companies that because it's hard to reverse. It is hard to reverse.
Yeah, you can provide all this information, like situations where an artist didn't even tap into anything and they were just added into a playlist that was running bots to make it look like more of a real playlist, and then their music gets taken down and we have to go back and say we literally ran no campaigns, they were just added to this playlist. And even most of the time then the DSP will still, like, it doesn't matter, fraud was ran on this track. Sometimes the reversal will be that they'll reinstate the track, but you start at 0 streams, you're not getting any money for any real streams or the fake streams, and you kind of start at ground zero. With those, I don't know how much it affects the data in the back end. There's definitely a note that there was artificial streaming that occurred on it. But I would say that if you have a bunch of songs that are continuously getting flagged, like, stop working with those companies for sure. And you just need to build up your catalog and make it all organic again to really get the ball rolling.
Let's get one. Sorry, I think we got time for one more, and that's it. I apologize.
We can hang out afterwards.
Hello, I'm James with Entergain, and so I'm just really excited that you're all doing this, and you guys are ahead of the curve. I'm curious, your opinion, what skills are needed for, all kinds of DSPs, labels, distro are all going to need to start doing this more. It's a growing area. Are there certain job functions in companies where people might most readily be cross-trained to do this anti-fraud work? And this is maybe a question for you, and then are there other industries that are ahead of us from which the music industry should be recruiting from when they're looking for people that can help do this kind of work?
I think it should be a centralized service, which obviously I'm biased towards because we are the leader in that service. So I think it should be a centralized service that handles this. You know, one of our advisors, Schumann, built all of the fraud detection services for Google and then built the account takeover company Shape that sold to F5 for, I think, $1.2 billion. One of our other advisors built Verifin, which is the fraud detection service for the financial industry. I think what we've learned from all of those other industries is that you actually want an eclectic set of individuals to identify fraud. It's not just music people or just fraud people. You'll have like chess champions in there. You'll have PhDs in physics. Everyone's going to come with
Translation, no one from the music business as it exists now.
you need all of these like
Me neither.
outlier thinkers to be able to come up with all the crazy ways that fraudsters might participate and then try to explain and then back check your own biases. So you know, it's really important that you have an eclectic set. I don't think it comes from one industry or the other. It's just like a dedicated iterative process.
Though, like data scientist is a good place to start, because if you can tap into the APIs that as a distributor are provided to us, like we can start to not, instead of waiting for Spotify to be like, hey, this was flagged, it's taken down, you can start to see things in real time, even if it's not on the same level. Like it's a starting point and you can use what you have at your resources.
If a track only has streams on YouTube, there's probably
I
fraud
also
going on.
wanted to say that part of what you need, as well as a skill set, is a dynamic, right? All of the services acting independently, all of the distributors acting independently, you have a limited amount of data, whereas a potential fraudster has a limited amount of insight into everything from the outside. You have a lot of insight about what you're doing, very limited insight into someone else. And if you keep calling each other on an ongoing basis, more than a certain amount, you can run into, it's a lot of them, significantly, but you can run into antitrust issues. So you do need to set up an independent entity to do that enforcement. And obviously the skills they have is important, but it's also just important to have someone that sits half outside so they can sort of have the insight into everything and share information in a way that's legally okay.
Thanks for making the case for our business.
That's a dynamic. I don't want to.
I love it. We agree.
Sorry, I think.
You'll need both, like you'll need that outside entity, but then that
Yes.
outside entity's going to
You've got to check it inside, because you got to own that and explain it to your artists and be able to educate them,
And I
and
don't
you
want-
can't have that completely.
Sorry,
outside.
just want to be clear. I don't know enough about the subject to endorse a person, but as a dynamic, I think this idea that all information goes through one place without an antitrust issue is something that a lot of industries have used successfully.
Correct.
I think we're over our time. I thank you for your patience. And I want to, we will be hearing, tonight over drinks, tales of wretched excess in the fraud business. Okay, maybe not over drinks, but you can ask him now. He's got some insane stories, and it seems like they are doing great work. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
And thank you to my panelists. Thank you.